I would like to start with a recap of what we did last week. We said we're moving from the short run toward the medium run. Now we try to relax some of the assumptions that we made. We focused last time on the labor market, how wages are determined. We looked at this from two angles. First, we thought about what determined wages, and we said wages, usually when you start a job, you think about not just the nominal wage, or the nominal wage that you would accept to start that job. You will have a number of factors in mind which will help you to decide whether or not to take that job. So one of the factors that we discussed is the expected price level, okay, and also the unemployment rate is important determinant of this, the level of the nominal wage that you would accept. In bad times, when the unemployment rate is high, then you don't have really much bargaining power around that. So it's very difficult to find a job anyway. And if you already working, then it's very difficult to find a job if you quit your job. So the idea here is that, okay, there's negative relationship between the unemployment rate and the nominal wage. And also we combined all other factors that may affect the nominal wage into one catch-all factor, which we called Z. And we gave an example last week of what kind of factors can be included in this Z variable. We said, for example, like unemployment benefits, or maybe how easy or how difficult to fire a worker, okay, to lay off workers. So these all factors are included in Z, and this variable is positively related to the nominal wage. On the other side, we thought about, okay, how firms decide on or determine the prices, set their prices. We said, if you remember how we came to that point, we said, well, that depends on the output level, and the output level, to do that, we looked at the production function, which is a relationship between inputs and outputs, and then we thought, okay, if there was only one input, which is labor, and then, so from there, we just came to the point that we drive this price setting relation where the price will be basically 1 plus M times wages, which means that the firms will set the prices with a markup over the wages or their costs. And in this situation, it's only wages, because we assume that there's only labor. Okay, so but in reality, workers care more about the real wage, not the nominal wage. So we made first an assumption that, okay, let's assume that the price level or the actual price level equal the expected price level, and that from there we try to drive the equilibrium and the labor market, in the sense that we wanted to know what determine real wage and also the unemployment rate. So we plot these two together, the markup on the vertical axis, or 1 over the markup on the vertical axis, to be just more accurate, 1 over 1 plus the markup, or the real wage, W over P, and on the horizontal axis we had the unemployment rate. And we said that level, or the unemployment rate, or the intersection point between these two, which you can see on figure A here, that show you the intersection point between both relationships. So both relations. So the price setting relations and the wage setting relations. So the price setting relation is the horizontal line. It's fixed. It's 1 over 1 plus M, plus the M is the markup. And the downward sloping curve here is the wage setting relation. And that point, the intersection point, if the actual price equal the expected price level, that means the unemployment rate at that point is the natural rate of unemployment. Okay, and then from there we tried to think about, or we discussed what determine the natural rate of unemployment. We discussed two factors, as we said, unemployment benefits. So if unemployment benefits increased, that means the wage setting relation or this downward sloping curve will shift upward or to the right, and that will increase the level of the natural rate of unemployment. Okay, so the other factor or the other determinant is the markup M. So if there's an increase in M, that will bring this horizontal line here, which represents the price setting relation. It will bring it down again as a response of an increased markup, and that means we move from point A to point A prime, which means a higher level of the natural unemployment rate. Okay, so just remember this point here, the equilibrium point or this intersection point in these three graphs, is the natural rate of unemployment, and that based on the assumption that the actual prices are equal the expected price level. Okay, so but this is not necessarily the case. So that is the issue or the main issue here. Okay, so this is not necessarily the case. So that means the actual unemployment rate could be somewhere around that natural rate of unemployment. So it could be below or above this natural rate of unemployment. But we also made some, as we move toward the medium run, so as we have more time, so we move on that horizon, that means it's very difficult to have expectation systematically wrong all the time. So meaning that at some point in the future, at some point when we have enough time, then we would imagine that prices or the actual prices will equal the expected price level anyway. So we can converge to that point where we, which is the intersection point here, which denotes the natural rate of unemployment, which we discuss now. And then we looked at the labor market from a slightly different way. We thought, okay, so we could think of rather than driving this relationship between real wage and the unemployment rate, we could actually think of labor market as a product, as a market for any product, like any other product, and the product here will be labor, so BN or employment, and firms demand labor, and household supply work or labor. Okay, and we start thinking about what determined the supply side, what determined the demand side. So in terms of the demand side, basically why firms demand labor, the first factor might come across is the output level, because that's the main reason why firms would demand more labor if they wish to expand their production or their output. So that means they need to hire more labor. So we would imagine that there's a positive relationship between the output level and the demand for labor. On the other side, of course, when they demand labor, there's a cost of labor, and that cost is the expected real wage. And now moving to more like a realistic situation, because as we said before, when you sign the contract based on your expectation of the price level in the future, not based on the current price level. Okay, so if you expect inflation to rise in the future, then you will probably ask for a higher nominal wage now. Okay, because once you sign the contract, you don't have much power on changing that contract. So you have to wait until your contract expires, and then maybe you could renegotiate the terms of your contract. But now, so to be more, and also firms do the same thing. So firms and workers, they are more forward-looking, so they think about the expected price level. So in that sense, then demand for labor does not depend on reality, or a more realistic situation does not depend on real wage. It depends on the expected real wage, meaning that you divide the nominal wage by the expected price level. And then we plot the demand for labor, the labor demand curve, which is a downward sloping curve. We plot this on the W. So we have on the vertical axis, we have nominal wages, and on the horizontal axis, we have employment. So remember, so in the previous slide, we had the real wage on the vertical axis and unemployment on the horizontal axis. But now we talk about nominal wage on the vertical axis and employment on the horizontal axis. From the other side, so this is the demand side. Looking at the supply side, again, we said household supply or are the suppliers of labor. And what determines the labor supply here is mainly, again, is expected real wage. So it's W, so nominal wage divided by expected price level, and that is an upward sloping curve, again on the same space, W and in space. And you see here now how expectation play an important role in both demand and supply curves. Of course, as you may imagine now, or as you may recall from last time, equilibrium point or the contractual wage or the equilibrium W, or nominal wage, is determined at the intersection point between the labor supply and labor demand for given expectations, or for given level of expectation or expected prices. When, again, we just go back to the same point, when the actual price equals the expected price level, that means this intersection point will determine, or will denote, the natural rate of employment, given that the variable we measure on the horizontal axis is employment, not unemployment. So that means that point, again, it's the same condition, or the same assumption we made when we discussed this using the wage setting relation and price setting relation. We said if that intersection point will be the natural rate of unemployment, because we had unemployment on the horizontal axis, so that will be the natural rate of unemployment. But here, when we because we have the employment or N on the horizontal axis, so that means the intersection point between labor supply and demand for labor and both curves, that intersection point denotes actually the natural rate of employment, given, or if the actual price equal the expected price level. But in reality, we could have a situation, or in the short run, we could have a situation where actual price actually deviate from, or actual price level deviates from the expected price level. So they are not, both are not the same. So if, for example, price level was higher, so the actual price level was higher than expected, that means the demand curve will shift to the right, and that means we will have a temporary positive employment gap, meaning that now we would have the actual employment will be actually somewhere above the natural rate of employment, okay? And that gap will be filled by those who are looking for jobs, okay? And that's, as I said, that's something temporary, and as I said, that means it would be above the natural rate of employment. The other case, if the actual prices were lower than the expected price, that means the demand, the labor demand curve will shift to the left, and that means we have a negative employment gap, and that means more people will be looking for jobs. So, and that means the natural, or the actual employment rate will be below the natural rate of employment. So we saw how when contract exists, we see that W, or the nominal wage, is determined by expectation, by actual employment is determined by the actual demand for labor, which, as we said, it could be, again, we could have a level of employment that is above or below the natural rate of employment. And one more thing we discussed, again, is what we mean by this natural rate of employment. It corresponds to what we called earlier is the natural rate of unemployment, which is the sum of two types of unemployment: frictional unemployment and structural unemployment. We said the frictional unemployment, when people move between jobs, there's some time in between they spend unemployed, or this time they looking for jobs. So that's called, this is the frictional unemployment. Structural unemployment, when you have people with skills that do not necessarily match the skills that are required. So you have jobs that require some skills and also you have workers who are looking for jobs, but they have different set of skills. So this kind of mismatch between both sides, this is what we call the structural unemployment. So the sum of these two, so just to not be confused with this, so the natural rate of unemployment doesn't mean 0% unemployment rate. It doesn't mean 0% unemployment rate. Okay, it rather means that the cyclical unemployment, which happens due to a shortage in demand for goods and services, that one equals 0. So the cyclical unemployment would be equal 0, and the natural rate of unemployment would be the sum of frictional and structural unemployment. So at that point, we'll be at the natural rate of unemployment, and in other words, that will be the full employment output level, or the potential output. We use this to drive the aggregate supply curve. So if you remember, we moved from labor market, we added the production function, and then we had the 45-degree line as a mirror, just to see different combination of price and output level. And then we saw how what shifts aggregate supply curve. If there's a rise in expected price level, that means the aggregate supply curve will shift upward. If there is a fall in expected prices or price level, that means the aggregate supply curve will shift downward. So that's everything we did. Going actually to build on what we did not just last time, before that as well today. So just to make things clear, in the medium run, we know that prices and wage contracts are due for renewal, so kind of more flexible compared to the short run. So in the short run, you remember we didn't discuss prices at all. We didn't talk about prices at all. We took prices as given, but now it's time to think about prices, how prices are determined. Okay, so in what we consider to be rigid or fixed in the short run, we now have the chance to think about how this might change and it become more, not perfectly flexible as it would be in the long run, as you will see today, but it will be kind of sticky, so it can be like kind of slow, but still it can change. So of course, because in the medium run, all agents, firms, and households or workers, they actually react according to up-to-date market conditions. So now they see how the prices are changing, and also if they expect the prices to rise, then they probably ask for, now they have, given that this is time to renew contracts, now they would require, or they would ask higher wages. So what we did last time, we focus on wages, what determine wages. This lecture will be mainly focusing on prices, and to be more specific, what we did, or we going to bring pieces together from what we did before. So in lecture 7, we derived the aggregate demand curve, downward sloping curve. We used the ISLM model, lecture 7, to drive that. Last week, we used those 4 diagrams, starting from the labor market equilibrium on the production, and then in the production function, moving to the 45-degree line and going back to the P and Y space. We drive the aggregate supply curve. So basically now we have 2 sides. Okay, we have the aggregate demand. We know how it looks like. We have the aggregate supply. We know more about the aggregate supply now, given that how it is different from the short run to the medium run, moving toward the long run. So if we bring these pieces together, then we will know what determine prices, or how the price level is determined in an economy. Just before we move to that point, just you should notice that people or agents in general, economic agents in general, are concerned about the percent change in price, which is the inflation rate, more than the price itself. So let's now, as I said, let's now put these pieces together, the aggregate demand and aggregate supply and curves, and see how this work, or how can we use this analytical framework to understand how prices and output level are determined in the short run and in the long run as well. So just to remind you, just moving from the short run toward the long run, we're moving from a price level that we assume to be fixed, so most prices do not change in the very short run, but then moving toward the long run, we would expect that all prices to be flexible. And when I talk about prices here, I actually include wages as well. Just think of wages here as the price of labor. Okay, so all prices in the long run should be more flexible, so it can adjust according to what drive the equilibrium in the macroeconomy, which we will look at today.